So hello everyone and welcome to our lecture for week 1, and as we said, we're gonna be simply following chapters from our textbook. Of course, this is your textbook, and the chapters that we'll be covering today are chapters 1 and 2. For chapter 1, I'm going to talk about two main ideas. The first one is called model building and the second is called assumptions. And the starting point is from page 17, and we want to look at how economists actually think about legal rules. So the course is really about looking at legal rules. So some of the rules that we have, for example, learned in other courses, and we're going to look at these rules, but from a different perspective, from an economics perspective, where we be able to apply economic concepts to ascertain the performance of certain rules and rank the rules as to preference, which one is better than the other, and so on. So this all relies on something called the art of model building. Economics is really about, if you want to name it differently, you would find a different name for economics. You would call it model building. So everything that we do in economics is really about building a model, which could be in many different forms. It could be a verbal model. So most of the models we're going to see in this course are going to be verbal models. So this is the simplest really type of models, but they are still very powerful in showing us how actually legal systems works, which ones are better than others, and so on. They could also be graphical models. You must have heard probably about something called the supply and demand model in economics. So it's a simple chart, really a two-dimensional chart with two chopsticks, really. It's just a supply and demand curves, but you could do a lot of things with that model. We're not going to talk about that model here in this course. Our models are going to be simply very verbal, in the sense that we're gonna just simply use very little calculations to drive the point as far as the performance of legal rules and their ranking as in relation to preference. But there are also mathematical models, and if you want to continue with this discipline, if you want to go on and maybe get a master's degree in law and economics or even a PhD, of course, you can do that here at TSQ, but the most important sort of centers for these things are definitely at ANU, the Center of Law and Economics at the Australian National University in Canberra. And I was there just recently for the annual National Conference for Law and Economics. I also happen to be a vice president of that association. But if you want to continue to the top sort of tier of this discipline, then you will have to engage with mathematical models, and these are of course much more involved, and they will include things like as well statistics, and you might even sometimes need to use certain software to solve these mathematical models. So that's nothing that we're going to do in this course. This is just an introductory course, but that's how you develop sort of your skills in this field. Okay, so as we said, we are going to simply focus on our numerical models. So basically the models that you see in your course book. We are not going to introduce much different models than the one that you see there, and these are of course the models that will also guide your assignments, assignment 1 and assignment 2, and they will also be the same models that you will see in the final exam. For the 2 questions on the final exam, of course the final exam is open book, so you'll take this textbook with you to the exam, and you'll be able to also refer to these models during the exam. All right. There are 2 types of economic analysis. One of these types is called positive economics. So this is basically about explaining the legal system. The Chicago School, the Chicago Law School, or what's referred to as the Chicago School, are best known for this type of economics. Then you have the Yale School, which is known for normative economics, in the sense that it's not just about explaining how they work, how legal systems work, but they want to recommend changes to this legal system so that it even works better. Okay, and more of that can be found on chapter 19 of your course book. Now, We're going to continue with chapter 1. So that was the preface. So we're going to continue with chapter 1, and we're going to look at page 2, where you have reference to an American case, Escola and Coca-Cola bottling company. And here the judge was talking about two types of legal rules. One of them is called negligence, and the other is called absolute liability. So of course you have learned something about these, I suppose. And negligence, of course, talks about the existence of a duty of care, but there's a fault element there. So you wouldn't be found liable unless there is that fault element, and the fault being negligence. So you'd have breached that duty of care. But under absolute or strict liability, you wouldn't need to actually prove that fault element. All you have to prove is just the act itself. Once once there's a duty of care on you, then whatever injuries that occur because of or within that duty of care, then you are found liable. So which one is better? Which rule should we have? So the judge in this case, this is an American case, was talking about these rules, and he talks about certain things. For example, on page 3, he says it is to the public interest to discourage the marketing of products having defects that are a menace to the public. So this is very similar to the Donahue and Stevenson case, if you remember that case from your studies. But the question, of course, what does public interest actually mean? When the judge talks about public interest, does he actually mean things like efficiency? Is that a public interest, or does he talk more about equity or fairness? Similarly, he talks about, he says things like, against the risk of injury, there should be general and constant protection, and the manufacturer is best situated to afford such protection. So he says there's risk, and you have to identify the party that is best suited to assume that risk. Okay, so the question is again, why does he think that the manufacturer is best suited to afford such protection? So the judgment doesn't go into detail to explain really the rationale behind the decision. You remember the ratio decedent die, and we used to talk about giving the reasoning for the decision. Here, although the judge is talking about these things, but still, you know, the relevant questions that you see on page 3 at the bottom of page 3, the second paragraph, are not really discussed in any detail. So how do then we can answer these questions that you see on page 3? For example, we talk about things like so they start asking the questions from the very beginning. How is the criteria of public policy or the public interest to be defined? Should it take into account considerations of both efficiency and equity? What are the effects of the rules of negligence and absolute or strict liability on the care exercised by manufacturers in designing and producing products, on the care exercised by consumers in using products, on the price and output of the industry? Do the answers to these questions depend on whether the consumer misperceives the products or the product risks, and so on and so forth? It continues. So these questions, how can you answer them in order for you to inform the decision that's being made in any legal case? All right. So we are going to try to answer these questions in this course. And the way we're going to do that is the way that economics actually works. So we are going to make assumptions. So remember, the first thing we want to do is to build a model and use that model to be able to analyze real legal questions. But in order for us to do that, in order for us to build such models, we have to make assumptions. We have to make simplifications. Okay. So the art of economics is picking assumptions that simplify a problem enough, okay, to better understand certain features of it, without causing those features to be unimportant ones. Of course, if you are also a engineering student, you've done similar things as well, and you should be familiar with this idea of modeling. You'll find also in engineering things like disciplines called industrial operations research, rather, something called operations research or modeling and simulation. All of these things are very similar to what we're talking about here. But again, the models that we're going to look at are very simple models in this course. All we are going to look at is the models that use some just numerical manipulation. There will be no, of course, modeling and simulation or mathematical or even graphical models for that matter. All right, so we want to understand that there are certain economic concepts, and we'll introduce these as we go through this course. But these economic concepts are now going to be used on certain legal areas. So you would talk about things like economic concepts such as efficiency, equity, risk bearing and insurance, and competitive markets. All right, so we're going to introduce these in due course as we go along throughout this textbook, and we'll apply these concepts to things like nuisance or contracts or automobile accidents or law enforcement, pollution control, products liability, principal agent liability, and litigation and regulation. So we will cover most of these applications in this course, always using these concepts of efficiency, equity, risk bearing and insurance, and competitive markets. All right, let's then move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about efficiency and equity. So in this chapter we're going to look at efficiency and equity, define these, and see whether there's a conflict between these two. So if you are going to go after efficiency, is that going to reduce equity? And if you go after equity, is that going to reduce efficiency? So that's what we mean by conflict. And there will be some more standard assumptions that we're going to make to set the stage for introducing the material in chapter 3, which is the cost theorem, of course. All right. So let's start then with a definition of efficiency. This is a very simple definition, and that's the definition we need for this course. And it's pretty much what we call optimality in engineering. So if you have engineering background as well, or you're studying engineering, that's what we call optimization. How to optimize an objective function, for example. Same thing, optimization. Here we simplify all of that and say simply that if the efficiency is the relationship between two things. First is the aggregate benefits, and the second is the aggregate costs. So all that we are saying here is the relationship between aggregate benefits of a situation and the aggregate cost of a situation is called efficiency. So if you want to see something, if something is efficient or not, all you have to do is to calculate the benefits and then subtract the costs from these benefits to get what's known as net benefits, and that's all you need for efficiency. So efficiency is simply just taking the costs out of the benefits and see if you still have any benefits left after covering for those costs. There's also something called Pareto efficiency. Okay, so this is in the footnote on page 7 of your course book, and it says everyone can be made better off if society is organized in an efficient manner. That's just one of the ways you could say, you could explain what Pareto efficiency is, but it's also explained to you in your textbook by if there is no change from that situation that can make someone better off without making someone else worse off, we say that this situation is Pareto efficient or Pareto optimal. All right. What about then equity? So again, equity is defined on the same page, page 7, and the definition is simply that it is the distribution of income among individuals. So how should we distribute income? That's what equity is. So what is the standard for distributing income among individuals? And the reference here should in fact be as well to footnote 5 rather than Pareto efficiency. Alright, so this is better. Again, you see some discussion of equity on page 7 in the footnote 5. For our purposes is simply deciding how to distribute income among individuals, and we'll look at examples to explain this in some detail. Okay, so let's look at this example from page 8 of your textbook. Let's say that the government wants to build a dam. Okay, so the law would come in, of course, by saying whether the law should allow the government to build a dam or not. Okay, if there are, for example, environmental law considerations. Some of you have seen some cases like the Tasmanian case, for example, where they want to build a dam and so on. But the point is here that the government wants to build a dam. Is that a good idea? So if it's a good idea, so we could get the legal system to encourage it or to allow it at least. So in order for us to analyze this question, should the government build this dam or not? Let's say that there are only 2 individuals affected. So you see, we're trying to simplify things just to get some insights into how things actually work when there is such a situation. So we'll say there are 2 people affected. One of them is the dean of the Stanford Law School. So this is what the author is using. So I'm sticking exactly to the same example so that you can find it and follow. So the first is the dean of the Stanford Law School, and the second is Mitchell, who's the author of this book. All right. So the government wants to build a dam. 2 people affected, the dean and Mitchell. Now, without the dam, Dean and Mitchell have certain money. They have certain assets, if you like. Yeah? So something they have saved, say. So the Dean has $65, let's say, and Mitchell has $35. Okay? So their total income at the moment, what they have, is $100. All right. Now, if you build a dam, okay, the dam is going to cost $30. Okay? And all of that $30 is going to come from labor cost. And all of that labor cost is going to come from Mitchell himself. So if you build the dam, the cost is going to be $30, and all of that amount is going to go on. Who's going to bear that amount? The person who's going to bear that amount is Mitchell. Okay. Now the dam also creates benefits, and the benefits are worth $40. But all of these benefits, we're assuming, okay, would go to the dean because the only feasible location for the dam is on her property. So basically, if they want to build a dam, the only place they can build a dam on is dean's property, the dean's property, and she would get all of the money because they have, of course, to pay her in order for them to take that property and build the dam on. That's what we're assuming, at least in this example. So again, our question for you is, should the dam be built? How would you answer this question, given what we have assumed so far? So, you have to decide, first of all, which criteria you're going to use, or which criterion you're going to use. So let's just focus on efficiency versus equity. Okay? If you choose efficiency as your objective, so again, if you are an engineering student, you have heard about these things. If it's efficiency that you want to use as your objective, then we know that the benefits are going to be $40 and the costs are going to be $30. So the net benefits are going to be $10, which is positive, and hence the dam should be built. Notice how we did not care much in our when we calculated the efficiency. This is exactly the definition that we gave earlier for efficiency, right? It's the benefits minus the costs. Okay, simply. But we did not care much about where the benefits are going. Who's getting these benefits? You see, we thought of this as if it's one owner problem, as if there is no Mitchell and there is no Dean. You know, all that we have is that certain benefits are going to come up, and there are certain costs that will have to be paid out, and that's it. We don't dig deeper into finding who's getting the benefits, who's getting the costs, and so on and so forth. That's how you calculate efficiency. All right. What about if you choose equity instead as the objective? So, before the dam is built, we know that Dean has 65. So the Dean has 65 and Mitchell has $35, right? After the dam is built, what's going to happen? Now equity distinguishes between the two people. Yeah, it cares about where the money is going. You know? So the $40 that we talked about, which is the benefits from this project, from building the dam, are going to go to the Dean. So after the dam is built, the Dean of the law school will get 105. So their assets increased by that amount. What about Mitchell? Mitchell is going to pay for this through his labor. Okay, so the dam is going to be built through Mitchell's labor, and of course that means it will eat away from his assets or income, and that means he's left only with $5. Okay, so most people would say that's inequitable. The fact that the Dean now has 105 and Mitchell has only 5 doesn't make sense. So how then do you decide on equity? What if, say, there is an equity standard, right? Most people would say that we have to split things 50-50, but just for this example, we'll assume that, let's say that it's going to be 60-40. So we're going to split the benefits from this project through this standard of 60-40. So if the dam is not built, okay, in order for us to have 60-40 distribution of income, and because we started with 65 going to the Dean and 35 going to Mitchell, you're going to have to transfer $5 from the Dean because he's 65, so you have to bring him down to bring her down to 60. So that 5 should go to Mitchell, and now the Dean has $60 and Mitchell has $40, which is the distribution that we want to have, 60-40. So if the total income is 100, which is the case here, then you need to make sure that 60% of that 100 would go to the Dean and 40% would go to Mitchell, and that's how you would get an equitable outcome. Okay. Now what about if the dam is built then? What happens after the dam is built? So you'll have now to transfer $39 to Mitchell. Why is that? Because then the Dean is going to have, so remember the benefit out of this project is 40, but you'll have to transfer 39 of that to Mitchell, so all of it almost would have to go to Mitchell, and the Dean would get only $1. So now you would have the Dean has 66 and Mitchell is going to have 39. Do you know why Mitchell is going to have 44? Why is Mitchell going to have 44? So Mitchell started with 35, right? Then he had to pay for the dam, so now he lost $30. The dam costs $30, so he's left only with $5. But in order for us to restore the distribution of 60-40, he would get another $39, so that they will end up again 66 to 44, which is exactly a 60% 40% distribution again. So equity would say it doesn't matter whether you build a dam or not. If you build a dam, then you want to make sure that you will have this transfer in order for you to keep the ratio of distribution between the two 60 to 40. So this of course resolves the conflict between efficiency and equity. If you can transfer the money, then there's no problem. So you start and say, how much are the benefits of this project? So if you see the net benefits are positive, then you'd say, great, let's go ahead and do this project. And then after you finish the project, you make sure still after you finish the project that the income distribution is still 60 to 40, which is whatever, that the distribution is still in accordance with the equity standard that was agreed on. So if you can do this transfer, there's no problem, there's no conflict between efficiency and equity. Alright. So basically we assume that the transfers that we have done, $5 if the dam is not built, or the $39 if the dam is built, are costless. You can just go ahead and transfer. But what if that's not the case? So here is the general observation that I want you to focus on, which is on page 9 of your textbook. It says if the redistribution of income is costly, so you have to pay. So another, like engineering students probably would have also heard the term friction. So if there's friction in this transfer, so you lose some of the money simply because you want to transfer it, that's what we mean by costly. There may be a conflict then between efficiency and equity. Okay, so if you have, for example, sent money abroad, or wanted to transfer money sometimes between even banks, depending on which country you are in, you'll find that you'll have to pay fees for that. So you lose some of the money. That's the kind of cost that we're talking about here. So if there is such a cost, then there is a conflict between efficiency and equity. So it wouldn't be efficient for you to keep doing this redistribution. Okay, if the redistribution of income, however, is costless, so there's no friction, basically there's no conflict then between efficiency and equity. So if you can just transfer the money and you don't have to pay any fees for doing so, then of course there's no problem between efficiency and equity. Now in chapter 18, which is far deep into the course, but in chapter 18, because it's mentioned on that page in your textbook, it says, although income redistribution is generally costly, efficiency should be the principal criterion. So even though that the distribution of income is costly, we still should focus on efficiency, not on equity. So why? So in chapter 18 again, although income redistribution is generally costly, efficiency should be the principal criterion. And the quote from your textbook, the potential conflict between efficiency and equity when income redistribution is costly should be considered in the design of the government's tax and transfer system, but not generally in the choice of legal rules. So what they are saying that whatever happens, whenever there is cost in redistribution, we should have that attributed to a subset of our legal system, namely that legal system that talks about transfers in terms of welfare payments as well as taxes. That's where we're going to talk about the cost of transferring stuff, okay? But in the rest of our legal system, we're going to maintain this assumption that there is no cost. Okay, so when we're going to choose between legal rules, we're going to assume that there is no cost in transferring these funds. So the idea is, again, the potential conflict between these two, efficiency and equity, is when income distribution is costly, and that should be then considered in taxes and transfer systems, not in deciding the choice between legal rules. So when we want to decide the choice between legal rules, really we're going to assume that there's no conflict between efficiency and equity. So we are basically assuming that income can be costlessly distributed. So basically there is no cost in distributing income. All right. Then there are a few more assumptions that you need to keep in mind as we move forward, just as all to simplify our analysis. So the first one is that all these benefits and costs we need to use to calculate efficiency are measurable in dollars. So there's no problem measuring the benefits and the costs. Okay, so if you want to build something or you want to do something or anything that we're going to talk about in the book, it's going to be assumed that we know exactly how much it costs and how much the benefit is going to be in dollar terms. Okay. The second point is that individuals themselves determine this dollar value. So we're not going to determine this for the individual is sovereign, or the customer is sovereign, and they know how much the costs are and the benefits are. And that these dollar values in the third assumption are not affected by policy. Okay. So what does that mean? So they give an example of that at the bottom of bottom of page 10. It says, for example, an individual's evaluation of desirability of cleaner air, so whether they want to have cleaner air or not, is assumed not to depend on whether the legal system establishes a right to clean air. So not because we give you this right to clean air, now you want clean air. You want clean air regardless of whether there's in fact a rule saying that you can get clean air or not. Okay, so what you want is not actually dictated by policy. It's up to you. You decide, you know, what the dollar values are, what the costs are, what the benefits are. And finally, we want to introduce something called utility maximization. So we want to say that these individuals are trying to maximize their net benefits. Net benefits meaning the difference between their benefits and costs, or the benefits minus the costs. Okay, so that's where we're going with that. Okay, so that's the end of this lecture, and for next week we are going to start working on the course theorem, and I'll be talking to you again soon.